My name is Mabel, and I'm 54 years old. When I look back at my son Jake's wedding day, I should remember the joy on his face as he married Sarah, the woman of his dreams. Instead, I remember the moment my 28-year marriage exploded in front of 60 guests at the Riverside Manor. What was supposed to be the happiest day of our family turned into the day I discovered my husband's ultimate betrayal. But sometimes the worst moments reveal our greatest strength. Before I share what happened on what should have been the most beautiful celebration of our lives, let me know where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Richard and I had been married for 28 years when Jake announced his engagement to Sarah. We met in college, both studying at Portland State University. He was pursuing engineering while I was working toward my nursing degree. Our love story seemed perfect back then. He was tall, dark-haired, with gentle brown eyes that made me feel like the most important person in the world. I was young, optimistic, believing that love could conquer anything life threw our way. We built our life in a cozy neighborhood just outside Portland, Oregon, in a 2-story colonial house with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. I created a garden that became my sanctuary, filled with roses, lavender, and a vegetable patch where I grew tomatoes and herbs. Every spring I would plant new flowers, while Richard worked on weekend projects, fixing the deck or painting the garage. Richard worked as a civil engineer for the city, designing bridges that connected communities across the Columbia River. His work was meaningful, important. He would come home excited about new projects, sketching designs on napkins during dinner, explaining how his bridges would help people reach their destinations safely. I spent my days at Providence Medical Center, caring for patients in the oncology ward. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply rewarding. Our lives had a beautiful rhythm that sustained us through the years. Sunday mornings meant pancakes with fresh blueberries from our garden and coffee while reading the Portland Oregonian together. Richard would read me interesting articles from the business section, while I shared stories from the lifestyle pages. Evenings were spent talking about our days, sharing dreams for Jake's future, planning vacations to the Oregon coast. Jake grew up to be everything we hoped for and more. Kind, intelligent, hardworking, with Richard's analytical mind and my compassionate heart. He excelled in school, played baseball through high school, and earned a business degree from Portland State, following in our footsteps. When he brought Sarah home 3 years ago during Thanksgiving dinner, I knew immediately she was special. Sarah worked as a pediatric teacher at a local elementary school and had this infectious laugh that filled our house with warmth and light. She was petite, with curly blonde hair and blue eyes that sparkled when she smiled. The way she looked at Jake reminded me of how I used to look at Richard in our early years. Their engagement last Christmas felt like the perfect culmination of everything Richard and I had built together as parents and partners. But something shifted dramatically in Richard about 6 months before the wedding. The changes were subtle at first, easy to explain away. He started working late more frequently, claiming budget deadlines and city council meetings. He always carried his phone face down on the table now, something he had never done in all our years together. The device seemed to buzz constantly with notifications. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial, lacking the depth and intimacy we had always shared. When I would ask about his day, his responses felt rehearsed, empty, as if he was reciting lines from a script rather than sharing genuine experiences. During family dinners with Jake and Sarah, Richard would check his phone constantly, claiming urgent work emails that required immediate attention. I spent 6 months meticulously planning Jake's wedding, pouring my heart into every single detail. Every decision mattered to me, because this was our only child, our precious son, beginning the most important chapter of his life. I chose the Riverside Manor because of its stunning view of the Columbia River, where Richard had proposed to me 29 years earlier. The irony of that location would not be lost on me later. I selected white roses, mixed with baby's breath, arranged in elegant bouquets that would photograph beautifully against the river backdrop. I arranged the seating chart 3 times to ensure everyone felt comfortable, placing family members strategically to avoid old feuds and encourage new friendships. I worked closely with the chef to create a menu that reflected both families' traditions, including Richard's mother's famous dinner rolls and my grandmother's chocolate cake recipe. The warning signs were everywhere, but I explained them away with the skill of someone desperate to preserve her illusion of happiness. When I found text messages to someone named Alex Richard, claimed it was a male colleague from the engineering department, helping with a complex bridge renovation project. When he started buying new clothes and expensive cologne, I thought he was making an effort to look good for Jake's wedding photos. When he became emotionally distant and physically cold, I blamed stress from work pressures and wedding planning expenses. When he stopped initiating conversations about our retirement dreams or future travel plans, I told myself he was simply focused on Jake's transition into married life. I was a master of self-deception, protecting myself from truths I was not ready to face. The morning of Jake's wedding arrived, with gorgeous October sunshine streaming through our bedroom windows, painting everything in golden light that seemed to promise a perfect day ahead. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, my heart racing with excitement, anticipation, and overwhelming maternal pride. This was the day I had dreamed about, since Jake took his first steps since he graduated from high school, since he brought Sarah home to meet us. Richard was already awake, sitting on the edge of our bed and staring intensely at his phone screen. His dark hair was messy from sleep, but his expression was alert-focused, as if he had been awake for hours. When I reached over to kiss him good morning, wanting to share this momentous day with my husband, he barely acknowledged my presence. His response was mechanical, distracted. "I need to get to the venue early," he announced without looking at me, his voice flat and businesslike. "Some last-minute details to handle with the catering staff." I found this explanation odd, since Amanda, our wedding coordinator, had assured us repeatedly that everything was completely under control. We had paid her precisely to handle any last-minute issues so we could focus on enjoying our son's special day. "What kind of details?" I asked, genuinely curious, and wanting to help if there were problems. Richard waved dismissively, still not meeting my eyes. "Nothing you need to worry about. I will take care of everything." His tone suggested the conversation was over, leaving no room for further questions or discussion. I spent the morning completely alone, getting ready for the most important day in our family's recent history. As I applied my makeup carefully in the bathroom mirror, I kept expecting Richard to return home to share this special morning with me, to talk about how proud we were of Jake. Instead, I received a brief text message at 10:15. "See you at the church, running behind schedule." 28 years of marriage, and my husband could not even get ready with me on our son's wedding day. The realization hit me like a cold wave, but I pushed the hurt away, focusing instead on the joy of the day ahead. I chose my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress with 3/4 sleeves and a modest neckline paired with pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary. The ceremony at St. Mark's Episcopal Church was absolutely perfect, everything a mother could hope for her son's wedding day. The church was filled with soft morning light filtering through stained glass windows, creating rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. White roses and greenery decorated the altar, filling the air with delicate fragrance. Jake looked incredibly handsome in his black tuxedo, waiting nervously at the altar next to Pastor Williams, who had baptized him as an infant. My son's hands were clasped behind his back, and I could see him taking deep breaths to calm his nerves. When the music began, and Sarah appeared at the back of the church in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, Jake's face transformed with pure joy and love. The bride was absolutely radiant, carrying a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath that perfectly complemented her dress. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and when he placed her hand in Jake's, there was not a dry eye in the entire church. I watched my son's face light up as his bride approached, and my heart swelled with overwhelming pride and happiness. Richard stood beside me during the ceremony, physically present, but emotionally absent. While I dabbed tears of joy from my eyes with the lace handkerchief my mother had given me, he checked his phone multiple times, even during the exchange of vows. The disrespect was shocking, but I tried to focus on the beautiful words Jake and Sarah were speaking to each other. During the family photos after the ceremony, Richard's distraction became even more obvious and embarrassing. The photographer had to ask him repeatedly to look at the camera, to put his arm around me, to smile naturally. When she requested a shot of just Richard and me as the parents of the groom, his smile looked forced, artificial, like he was performing a role he no longer wanted to play. Between photo sessions, I noticed Richard glancing repeatedly toward the church parking lot, as if he was looking for someone specific or expecting an important arrival. When I asked if he was waiting for anyone, he shook his head quickly and claimed he was just checking the time, worried about staying on schedule for the reception. The drive from St. Mark's to the Riverside Manor should have been filled with celebration, reflection on the beautiful ceremony, and excited discussion about the reception ahead. Instead, Richard drove our car in complete silence, his jaw clenched tightly, his knuckles white, as he gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force. I tried multiple times to make conversation about how lovely Sarah looked, how handsome Jake appeared, how perfectly the ceremony had gone, how proud we should feel as parents. Richard's responses were monosyllabic grunts or distracted mm-hms that made it clear he was not listening to anything I said. The tension in the car was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I could not understand what was causing Richard's obvious stress and agitation. We were celebrating our son's wedding, surrounded by family and friends, witnessing the beginning of Jake's new life with a wonderful woman. This should have been one of the happiest days of our lives together. Arriving at the Riverside Manor, I immediately felt a sense of unease that I could not quite explain or justify. The venue looked absolutely stunning, exactly as I had envisioned during months of careful planning. White roses and greenery decorated every table. The view of the Columbia River was breathtaking, and the late afternoon sunshine created perfect lighting for photographs. But something felt wrong, out of place, like a discordant note in an otherwise beautiful symphony. As guests began arriving and mingling during the cocktail hour, I noticed an unfamiliar woman at table 7 who immediately caught my attention. She had striking red hair, styled in an elegant updo, and she was wearing a sophisticated black dress that seemed too formal and expensive for someone who was not family. The woman moved through the reception area with remarkable confidence, introducing herself to other guests as if she belonged there. When I discreetly asked other family members if they knew her, everyone seemed confused about her identity and presence. My sister Patricia had never seen her before, and Sarah's parents did not recognize her either. When I approached Richard to ask about the mysterious guest, his explanation was vague and unsatisfying. "Oh, that's Alexandra from my office. I invited a few colleagues to join the celebration." This seemed extremely strange, since Richard had never mentioned wanting to bring work friends to Jake's wedding, and we had already confirmed our final guest count with the catering staff weeks earlier. "I don't remember discussing inviting people from your work," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral and non-accusatory. "When did you decide to add extra guests?" Richard's response was dismissive and irritated. "It's not a big deal, Mabel. There's plenty of room, and I thought it would be nice to include some colleagues." During the cocktail hour, I found myself watching Alexandra from across the room, trying to understand why her presence made me so uncomfortable. She moved with calculated confidence, introducing herself to other guests as Richard's friend from the engineering department. Her smile was perfectly practiced, her conversation smooth and rehearsed. But something about her demeanor felt artificial, calculated, like she was performing a role rather than genuinely enjoying the celebration. When she caught my eye across the room and smiled directly at me, there was something predatory in her expression that made my stomach turn with inexplicable dread. I also noticed that Alexandra seemed remarkably well informed about our family, for someone who was supposedly just a work colleague. She knew Jake's college major, Sarah's profession, even details about our house and neighborhood that Richard would have had to share deliberately. Why would he discuss such personal family information with a casual work acquaintance? The seating arrangements for dinner created another moment of confusion and concern. Despite the carefully organized seating chart I had created and confirmed multiple times with the wedding coordinator, Alexandra had somehow been placed directly across from Richard and me at the head table. This was completely wrong and contrary to every discussion we had had about table arrangements. When I quietly approached Amanda, our wedding coordinator, to ask about the seating change, she looked genuinely confused and concerned. "Someone from your family called this morning requesting the modification," she explained apologetically. "I assumed it was an important family member who needed to be accommodated at the last minute." The realization that Richard had deliberately manipulated the seating arrangements to place Alexandra directly across from us hit me like a physical blow. This was not a coincidence or a mistake. This was intentional, planned, calculated. My husband had orchestrated this situation, and I was beginning to understand that something far worse than simple rudeness was happening. As we took our seats for the dinner service, I felt the first real wave of genuine panic wash over me. Alexandra sat directly across from Richard, positioned so they could maintain eye contact throughout the meal. Her smile was confident, almost triumphant, as if she was exactly where she wanted to be. The dinner service began with traditional toasts from both families, moments that should have been filled with love, warmth, and celebration of Jake and Sarah's new marriage. Sarah's parents spoke first, delivering a beautiful speech about love commitment, and the joy of watching their daughter find her perfect match in our son. Their words about marriage being a partnership built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect felt like arrows piercing my heart as I watched Richard and Alexandra exchange meaningful glances across the table. Every mention of fidelity and commitment seemed to highlight the growing chasm between the values being celebrated and the reality of what was happening right in front of me. When it was my turn to speak, I stood on trembling legs and shared carefully prepared stories about Jake's childhood, about teaching him to ride a bicycle in our driveway, helping him with homework at the kitchen table, watching him grow from a curious little boy into the remarkable man he had become. I spoke about the pride Richard and I felt as parents about our hopes and dreams for Jake and Sarah's future together. But as I delivered my heartfelt words about family love and partnership, I realized that Richard was completely disconnected from my speech. Instead of listening to my tribute to our son, he was staring at his phone screen, occasionally glancing up at Alexandra, with expressions that made my heart sink with growing realization. The contrast was stark and humiliating. While I poured my heart out about our family's love and pride, my husband of 28 years could not even be bothered to listen. The other guests began to notice Richard's rudeness, shifting uncomfortably in their seats and exchanging concerned glances. After I finished speaking, the entire room turned expectantly toward Richard, waiting for the traditional father of the groom toast. This was his moment to share his pride in Jake, to welcome Sarah into our family, to celebrate the love and commitment we were all witnessing. But instead of standing to speak, Richard waved dismissively at the expectant faces. "Mabel covered everything perfectly," he announced with obvious irritation. "I don't need to add anything to what she already said." The disappointment and hurt on Jake's face was absolutely heartbreaking to witness. Our son had always looked up to his father, admired Richard's engineering accomplishments, sought his approval and guidance throughout his life. Jake's best man, David, tried to lighten the mood by making a humorous toast about their college adventures, but the damage was already done. Richard's refusal to speak at his own son's wedding created an atmosphere of tension and confusion that spread throughout the room like a dark cloud covering the sun. Throughout the dinner's courses, I noticed increasingly disturbing details that made my skin crawl with growing awareness of what was happening. Alexandra would reach across the table to pass dishes directly to Richard, letting her fingers linger on his hand longer than necessary. She laughed too loudly at comments he made, even when they were not remotely funny. Most disturbing of all, Richard seemed completely comfortable with her attention, even encouraging it with smiles and responses that he had not directed toward me in months. Their interaction had the intimate quality of people who knew each other far better than casual work colleagues, people who shared private jokes and secret understanding. Other guests were beginning to notice the strange dynamic developing at our table. My sister Patricia kept shooting me concerned looks from her table across the room. Jake's college friends whispered among themselves, clearly confused by the tension they could sense, but not understand. Even Sarah's elderly grandmother leaned over to ask me quietly if everything was all right with Richard. I excused myself to the ladies' room, desperately needing a moment alone to collect my thoughts and calm my racing heart. In the mirror, I looked at the woman I had become over 54 years of life. Laugh lines around my eyes, from years of happiness and joy, silver threads beginning to show in my brown hair, wearing the navy blue dress I had carefully selected for this special celebration. The moment that changed everything happened during dessert service, when individual chocolate soufflés were being placed in front of each guest. The waiters moved efficiently between tables, and conversations had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a successful wedding reception. Everything appeared normal, celebratory, exactly as it should be. Then Richard suddenly stood up from his chair without warning or preamble. The movement was so abrupt and unexpected that it startled me and several other guests at our table. He reached for his wine glass, still half full of the expensive Pinot Noir we had selected for the reception, and picked up his dinner knife. The distinctive ringing sound of metal against crystal cut through the gentle conversation and laughter filling the room. That sound has a unique power to command attention, and within seconds, 60 guests had turned their eyes toward our table, expecting to hear the touching father of the groom speech that had been notably absent from the evening's program. Jake's face immediately lit up with anticipation and relief. Finally, he was going to get the moment with his father that he had been hoping for throughout the entire day. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand, thinking we were about to hear something beautiful about love, family, and the bonds that unite us across generations. Richard cleared his throat deliberately and began speaking in a voice that carried clearly across the completely silent room. His tone was confident, almost aggressive, lacking any of the warmth or emotion you would expect from a father addressing his son's wedding guests. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Jake and Sarah." He began his words formal and rehearsed. "I have something very important that I need to share with everyone here, especially my family." Something in his tone immediately triggered alarm bells in my mind. This was not the beginning of a loving father's tribute to his son. The words felt cold, calculated, dangerous, in ways I could not yet fully comprehend. I glanced quickly at Alexandra, who was sitting perfectly still, with what I can only describe as a satisfied, expectant smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She knew exactly what was coming. This moment had been planned, orchestrated, prepared in advance. Richard was not having a spontaneous emotional breakdown or making an impulsive decision driven by wedding day stress. This was deliberate, intentional, calculated to cause maximum impact and damage. After 28 years of marriage, Richard continued, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. "I have finally discovered what real love actually feels like. I have found someone who understands me completely, who makes me feel alive again in ways I had forgotten were even possible." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees in an instant. You could feel the collective intake of breath from 60 people who suddenly realized they were witnessing something terrible and unprecedented. Jake started to rise from his chair, confusion and alarm spreading rapidly across his handsome face. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in shock and horror, her beautiful wedding makeup already beginning to streak with tears. The other guests sat frozen in their seats, not quite comprehending what they were witnessing, but understanding instinctively that something catastrophic was happening to our family. Richard looked directly at me, making deliberate eye contact as he prepared to deliver the final devastating blow. His expression was cold, determined, without a trace of the love or respect that should exist between husband and wife after nearly 3 decades of shared life. "Mabel, I want a divorce," he announced with shocking clarity and conviction. "I cannot and will not continue pretending that our marriage means anything to me anymore. Alexandra has shown me what I have been missing all these years, and I refuse to waste any more time living this lie." The silence that followed his words was deafening, profound, like the moment after lightning strikes before thunder crashes. You could hear the gentle lapping of the Columbia River against the shore, outside the windows, the distant sound of music from another wedding reception in a different part of the manor, but in our room, 60 people sat in stunned, horrified silence. The explosion of reactions that followed Richard's announcement created chaos unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Jake erupted from his chair with such force that it toppled backward, crashing to the floor with a sound that echoed through the silent room. His face turned bright red with rage, disbelief, and heartbreak as he processed what his father had just done. "Dad, what the hell is wrong with you?" Jake shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "This is my wedding day. How could you do this to Mom? How could you do this to all of us?" His words carried the pain of a son watching his hero reveal himself to be something completely different than he had always believed. Sarah was crying openly now, her perfect wedding makeup streaming down her cheeks in dark rivulets. Her mother rushed to comfort her, while her father stared at Richard with undisguised disgust and anger. The carefully planned celebration was disintegrating into a nightmare that would forever taint what should have been the happiest day of their lives. My sister Patricia stood up from her table, her face flushed with protective fury. "Richard, you are despicable," she called out across the room. "How dare you destroy this family on Jake's wedding day?" Other family members began voicing their shock and outrage, creating a cacophony of angry voices and confused questions. Alexandra, meanwhile, maintained that same satisfied smile throughout the chaos, as if she was watching a performance she had carefully directed, and was pleased with how well the actors were following her script. She even had the audacity to raise her wine glass slightly, as if toasting Richard's courage in finally speaking his truth. But something completely unexpected happened to me in that moment of maximum crisis and humiliation. Instead of feeling devastated or destroyed, instead of breaking down into tears or screaming at my husband of nearly 3 decades, I felt a strange sense of clarity and calm wash over me like a cool breeze on a hot day. It was as if a thick fog had suddenly been lifted from my mind, allowing me to see everything with perfect crystalline clarity for the first time in months. All the pieces of Richard's strange behavior, his emotional distance, his secretive phone calls, his lack of interest in Jake's wedding planning, suddenly formed a complete picture that made perfect sense. I stood up slowly and deliberately, smoothing the skirt of my navy dress with steady hands. Instead of responding with the emotional breakdown that everyone expected, I smiled at Richard. Not a hurt smile or a sarcastic expression, but a genuinely calm, almost grateful look that seemed to confuse him completely. "Thank you, Richard," I said in a clear voice that carried easily across the silent room. "That is actually perfect timing on your part." The unexpected nature of my response created even deeper silence than Richard's announcement had generated. Every person in the room stared at me with amazement, wondering how I could possibly be responding with such composure to such a devastating public betrayal. Richard's confident expression began to falter as he realized that I was not reacting according to his expectations. He had clearly anticipated tears, pleased desperate attempts to save our marriage. Instead, he was facing a woman who seemed almost relieved by his announcement. I reached calmly into my small evening purse, the navy clutch that matched my dress perfectly, and withdrew something that I had been carrying for exactly 3 months and 2 weeks. Every guest in the room watched with fascination as I placed a thick manila envelope on the table in front of Richard, right next to his untouched chocolate soufflé. "Before you make any additional announcements," I said, still maintaining that strange sense of calm that had settled over me like a protective shield, "I think everyone in this room should know the complete truth about your new relationship and exactly who Alexandra really is." Richard stared at the envelope with growing alarm, his confident expression beginning to crumble as he realized that I had information he was not expecting me to possess. Alexandra's satisfied smile disappeared completely for the first time all evening, and genuine concern began to replace her earlier smugness. I opened the envelope methodically, taking my time to build suspense and ensure that every guest in the room was paying complete attention to what I was about to reveal. The first items I removed were a series of professional photographs taken by Vincent Murphy, the private investigator I had hired 12 weeks earlier after discovering Richard's suspicious behavior. The photographs were clear, well-composed, and absolutely damning. They showed Richard and Alexandra entering and leaving the Marriott downtown hotel on multiple occasions over the past 8 months. There were images of them dining intimately at expensive restaurants across Portland, holding hands while walking through Pioneer Courthouse Square, kissing passionately in the parking lot of a romantic restaurant overlooking the Columbia River. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the captivated audience, "I have been fully aware of my husband's affair for quite some time. Vincent Murphy, a highly respected private investigator, has been very thorough in documenting Richard's activities and relationship with this woman." I spread several of the most revealing photographs across the table where everyone could see them clearly. The images told a story of deception, betrayal, and calculated dishonesty that had been going on for far longer than anyone in the room had imagined possible. Next, I removed copies of bank statements that revealed the true extent of Richard's betrayal. Over the past 6 months, he had systematically withdrawn money from our joint savings account, transferring a total of $45,000 to an account belonging to Alexandra Jenkins. This represented decades of careful saving money we had set aside for our retirement emergency funds meant to provide security in our later years. "This is our life savings," I explained to the shocked guests. Money that was supposed to ensure our financial security systematically stolen to fund Richard's affair. The dollar amount created audible gasps throughout the room as people realized the magnitude of Richard's financial betrayal. But I had saved the most devastating revelations for last. Vincent's background investigation had uncovered information about Alexandra that was far more shocking than simple adultery. I held up an official document as I prepared to destroy whatever remained of Richard's confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each revelation, "I would like you to meet Sandra Williams, age 42, not Alexandra Jenkins, as she has been introducing herself to everyone tonight." The name change revelations sent another wave of shock through the room, but I was just getting started. Sandra, who had been preparing to leave, froze in her chair as she realized that her carefully constructed false identity was about to be completely exposed. "Sandra has quite an extensive and fascinating criminal background," I continued relentlessly. "She has been previously convicted of financial fraud and identity theft in 3 different states: California, Nevada, and Arizona. Her method of operation is always exactly the same: target married men in stable financial situations, seduce them into believing they have found their one true love, then systematically drain their assets before disappearing without a trace." Richard was staring at me in complete shock and disbelief, his mouth hanging open as if he could not process the information I was sharing. "That's completely impossible," he stammered weakly. "Alexandra works at Henderson Engineering downtown. She's a senior project manager in their infrastructure division." I smiled sympathetically and pulled out another official document from Vincent's investigation. "Henderson Engineering has no employee named Alexandra Jenkins Richard. They do, however, have an active restraining order against Sandra Williams, who was terminated 18 months ago for embezzling client funds and attempting to seduce married executives." The revelations continued to unfold with devastating efficiency, each new piece of information destroying more of Richard's confidence and Sandra's carefully constructed facade. Vincent's investigation had been incredibly thorough, uncovering details that painted a picture of systematic deception and criminal behavior spanning multiple states and numerous victims. "Sandra Williams has 3 children, with 3 different men." I continued consulting the investigative report. "None of these fathers know her current whereabouts or have received child support payments in over 2 years. She currently owes more than $80,000 in unpaid child support across multiple states." The additional revelations about Sandra's children seemed to hit Richard particularly hard. Throughout our marriage, he had always prided himself on being a devoted father to Jake, and the idea that Sandra had abandoned her own children clearly shocked him to his core. I pulled out copies of outstanding warrants and legal documents. Sandra also has active warrants for her arrest in California for check fraud and in Nevada for identity theft. She has used at least 7 different aliases over the past 5 years, including Jennifer Martinez, Lisa Thompson, and Catherine Davis. Jake had quietly signaled to hotel security, who were now positioning themselves strategically near the room's exits. Sandra realized that she was effectively trapped and finally dropped all pretense of being the sophisticated professional Alexandra Jenkins that she had portrayed to Richard and his family. "You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about," Sandra hissed at me, her refined accent disappearing completely to reveal a harsh street-smart voice underneath. Richard came to me. He pursued me aggressively. He told me repeatedly that his marriage had been over for years. The transformation was remarkable and chilling. The elegant, sophisticated woman who had charmed Richard was revealed to be someone completely different. Harder, cruder, obviously experienced in manipulation and deception. Her mask had finally slipped, revealing the predator underneath. I nodded sympathetically, maintaining my calm composure, despite the chaos erupting around us. "I am quite sure Richard did tell you exactly that, Sandra. My husband has always been exceptionally skilled at convincing people of whatever narrative suits his immediate needs and desires." Richard was now staring at Sandra with growing horror as he began to understand the full extent of his situation. Not only had he destroyed his marriage and humiliated his family on his son's wedding day, but he had been completely fooled by a professional con artist who had stolen nearly $50,000 from our life savings. The most interesting part of Vincent's investigation, I continued determined to share every detail of Sandra's deception, was discovering that she specifically targets men during significant family events, weddings, anniversaries, family reunions. She believes that men are most emotionally vulnerable and likely to make impulsive decisions during times of family stress or celebration. This revelation explained why Sandra had pushed so hard to attend Jake's wedding, why she had seemed so determined to create this public confrontation. Richard's announcement was not spontaneous. It was part of Sandra's calculated plan to maximize the emotional impact and cement Richard's commitment to leaving his family. The wedding guests watched in fascination and horror as the truth continued to unfold. What had begun as a simple wedding reception had transformed into something resembling a courtroom drama, with evidence being presented and lies being systematically exposed. Hotel security was now standing directly behind Sandra's chair, ready to detain her if she attempted to flee. When Portland police officers arrived minutes later, they immediately recognized her from existing warrant photographs and confirmed that she was indeed Sandra Williams, wanted in multiple states. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the officers said firmly, producing handcuffs. "You have outstanding warrants in California and Nevada, and we have reports of fraud activities in Oregon as well." Sandra's final mask dropped completely as she realized there was no escape from the consequences of her actions. "This is ridiculous," she shouted as the handcuffs clicked into place. Richard was a willing participant in everything. He knew exactly what he was doing. But before being led away, she delivered one final devastating blow to Richard's remaining dignity. "You were just another mark, honey," she called out with cruel satisfaction. "Did you honestly think a pathetic middle-aged man like you could satisfy a woman like me? You were never anything more than a bank account with legs." The aftermath of Sandra's arrest unfolded with swift and devastating consequences for Richard, while simultaneously bringing unexpected clarity and resolution to the chaotic evening. The Portland police officers confirmed that Sandra Williams had been under investigation for months, and Richard's relationship with her provided crucial evidence for their ongoing case. Jake approached our table with tears streaming down his face, his wedding tuxedo wrinkled from the evening's emotional turmoil. "Mom, I am so incredibly sorry," he said, wrapping me in a tight hug that conveyed years of love and respect. "I had absolutely no idea that Dad was capable of something this horrible and selfish." I could feel Jake's entire body shaking with a mixture of anger, disappointment, and protective love for me. This was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, and his father had turned it into a nightmare that would forever be associated with his wedding anniversary. The guilt he felt was evident in every word he spoke. Sarah approached us, neck still beautiful, despite her tear-streaked makeup and obvious emotional distress. "Mabel, you are the strongest, most incredible woman I know," she said, taking my hands in hers. "I cannot believe you handled this impossible situation with such grace and dignity. I am proud to call you my mother-in-law." Her words meant everything to me in that moment of triumph and devastation. Despite having her perfect wedding day destroyed by Richard's selfish announcement, Sarah was thinking about my feelings and offering comfort rather than focusing on her own disappointment. The other wedding guests began approaching our table as well, offering support and expressing their admiration for how I had handled the crisis. My sister Patricia hugged me tightly and whispered, "I always thought Richard was beneath you, but I never imagined he could be this cruel and stupid." Sarah's parents, who had known Richard for 3 years and always treated him with respect and affection, now looked at him with undisguised disgust. "We are so sorry this happened to you, Mabel," Sarah's father said. "No one deserves to be treated with such disrespect, especially not on their child's wedding day." Even guests who barely knew our family felt compelled to offer support. Uncle Frank Richards' elderly relative, who rarely spoke at family gatherings, approached me with tears in his eyes. "Mabel, I have watched you raise that boy with love and devotion for 26 years. You deserve so much better than this public humiliation." Richard finally found his voice, though it came out weak and desperate. "Mabel, please, I need to explain everything. I thought I loved her. I believed she was different. Special everything I felt was missing from our marriage. I never meant for any of this to happen, especially not tonight." I looked at my husband of 28 years with a mixture of pity, disappointment, and surprising clarity. "Richard, you just announced your intention to divorce me in front of our son's wedding guests. You humiliated our entire family on the most important day of Jake's life. You stole $45,000 from our retirement savings to fund an affair with a career criminal. There is absolutely nothing left to explain or discuss." The finality in my voice seemed to shock Richard more than anything else that had happened during the evening. He had expected tears, please desperate attempts to save our marriage and preserve our family. Instead, he was facing a woman who had clearly moved far beyond his betrayal into a place of strength and resolution. I removed my wedding rings slowly and deliberately. The diamond engagement ring Richard had given me 29 years earlier and the gold band we had exchanged during our wedding ceremony. I placed them carefully on the table next to the now cold chocolate souffle, creating a symbolic ending to nearly 3 decades of marriage. 28 years of marriage deserved a much better ending than this, I said with quiet dignity, but perhaps this public humiliation is exactly the ending that we needed to finally face the truth about what our relationship had become. The wedding coordinator approached our table hesitantly, clearly uncertain about how to proceed with the evening's remaining events. The cake-cutting ceremony was supposed to happen soon, followed by dancing and additional celebration, but the atmosphere had been completely poisoned by Richard's announcement and subsequent revelations. I made the decision for everyone involved. "Please continue with all the planned celebrations," I announced to the room full of guests. Jake and Sarah deserve to have their special day continue exactly as we planned. This is their wedding reception, not our divorce proceedings. My final moments at Jake's wedding reception were filled with a strange mixture of heartbreak and liberation that I had never experienced before. As I prepared to leave the Riverside Manor forever, walking away from 28 years of marriage and stepping into an uncertain but suddenly promising future, I felt the need to ensure that this devastating evening would not destroy my son's happiness. I approached Jake and Sarah, who were standing together near the head table, holding each other for comfort and support. Both of them looked devastated by the evening's events, their perfect wedding day forever tainted by Richard's selfish announcement and the shocking revelations about Sandra Williams. "My beautiful children," I said, using the term I had always planned to use for Sarah after the wedding, "I need you both to listen to me very carefully." I took their hands and looked directly into their eyes, wanting them to understand how important my next words were to their future happiness. "Do not let what happened here tonight ruin this perfect celebration of your love," I continued with firm conviction. Your marriage is about the two of you, about the commitment you made to each other in front of God and your families. Richard's choices have absolutely nothing to do with the strength of your relationship or the love you share. Jake's eyes filled with fresh tears as he struggled to process everything that had happened. But Mom, how can we celebrate when Dad just destroyed our family? How can we dance and cut the cake when our family is falling apart? I smiled at my son with all the love and wisdom I had gained over 54 years of life. Because love is stronger than betrayal, sweetheart. Because your marriage represents hope and commitment, and all the beautiful things that your father chose to throw away. Do not let his mistakes steal your joy. I hugged Sarah tightly, breathing in the scent of her wedding perfume and the roses in her bouquet. Sarah, you are getting the most wonderful husband in the world. Jake learned how to love and respect women by watching how Richard treated me for most of our marriage. He will never betray you the way his father betrayed me. Turning back to Jake, I placed my hands on his face the way I had when he was a little boy who needed comfort after a nightmare. Your father's choices do not reflect the kind of man you are or the kind of husband you will become. Love Sarah with your whole heart and build the marriage that Richard and I should have had but somehow lost along the way. The wedding guests had been watching our family conversation with respectful silence, understanding that they were witnessing something profound and important. When I turned to address the entire room, every person present gave me their complete attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced with clear, strong voice that carried to every corner of the room, this evening has been difficult and shocking for everyone involved. But we are here to celebrate Jake and Sarah's marriage, and that celebration should continue exactly as we planned. I gestured toward this beautiful wedding cake that had not yet been cut, the photographer who was standing ready to capture more precious moments, the musicians who were prepared to provide dancing music for the rest of the evening. Please eat cake dance with your loved ones and help Jake and Sarah create beautiful memories that will last a lifetime. Do not let one person's poor choices ruin this perfect celebration of love and commitment. The guests responded with spontaneous applause, showing their support for my decision and their determination to salvage something beautiful from the evening's chaos. People began moving toward the cake table, conversations resumed, and the atmosphere slowly shifted back towards celebration. I kissed Jake one final time, tasting the salt from his tears and feeling the strength in his embrace. Call me tomorrow, sweetheart. We will talk about everything, and I will help you understand that families can survive even the worst betrayals when they are built on real love. To Sarah, I whispered words I hoped would give her confidence in her new marriage. Take care of my son, but more importantly, let him take care of you. That is what real partnerships are built on: mutual care and respect. Then I walked out of the Riverside Manor, with my head held high, my shoulders straight, and my heart surprisingly light, despite everything that had happened. I left behind 28 years of marriage, but I was walking toward a future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities I had never considered before. The drive home through Portland's quiet streets gave me time to process the evening's events and begin planning for the completely different life that awaited me. For the first time in decades, every decision about my future would be mine alone to make. 6 months after Jake's wedding, I am sitting in my beautiful new apartment overlooking the Willamette River, watching the sunrise paint the water in brilliant shades of gold, orange, and pink. The apartment is significantly smaller than the house Richard and I shared for 20 years, but it feels more like home than anywhere I have lived since my childhood. The morning routine I have developed brings me more joy and satisfaction than I experienced during the final years of my marriage. I wake up naturally around 6 o'clock, brew a single cup of coffee using beans from a local Portland roaster, and sit on my small balcony to watch the city wake up below me. These quiet moments of solitude have become precious to me. The divorce proceedings concluded more quickly than anyone expected, partly because Richard was eager to avoid additional public scrutiny, and partly because the evidence of his financial misconduct was overwhelming. Oregon's no-fault divorce laws meant that his adultery did not legally matter in terms of asset division, but the theft of our joint savings certainly did. I recovered $22,000 of the $45,000 that Sandra had stolen, and Richard was required to pay me an additional $30,000 in compensation from his individual retirement account. The financial settlement, combined with my half of our home's sale proceeds, provided enough security for me to purchase my apartment and establish an emergency fund. My new life has developed a rhythm that brings me satisfaction and peace in ways I had forgotten were possible. I continue working at Providence Medical Center, but I transferred to the day shift, which gives me evenings and weekends to pursue interests I had neglected or abandoned during my marriage to Richard. The most surprising change has been my enrollment in painting classes at the Portland Art Museum. This was something I had dreamed about doing since college, but never made time for during the busy years of marriage and raising Jake. Now, every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I lose myself in colors and brushstrokes, creating landscapes and still life paintings that express emotions I could never put into words. Eleanor Martinez, my 70-year-old painting instructor, has become an unexpected friend and mentor who has helped me navigate the challenges of starting over at 54. Eleanor lived through her own devastating divorce 30 years ago, when her husband left her for a younger colleague, taking most of their assets and leaving her to rebuild her life from scratch. Starting over is not about forgetting or erasing the past, Eleanor told me during one of our Saturday morning painting sessions. It is about refusing to let past disappointments define your future possibilities. You have decades of life ahead of you, Mabel. Make sure they are decades you choose for yourself. We paint watercolor landscapes together while sharing stories about resilience, rediscovery, and the unexpected freedom that can come from life's worst betrayals. Eleanor has taught me that aging can be about expansion rather than limitation, about discovering new aspects of yourself, rather than simply maintaining what already exists. Jake struggled with complicated emotions for several months after his wedding day. The combination of guilt, anger, and protective love for me created psychological turmoil that affected his new marriage and his relationship with Richard. We spent many hours talking through his feelings, helping him understand that parents are flawed human beings who sometimes make terrible choices. I keep thinking I should have seen the signs, Jake told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. I should have noticed that Dad was acting strange, that he was being cruel to you. I should have protected you somehow. The guilt he carried was breaking my heart, so I worked hard to help him understand that Richard's choices were not his responsibility. Sweetheart, you were focused on building your new life with Sarah exactly as you should have been. Your father is a grown man who made deliberate choices. None of this is your fault. Sarah has been absolutely wonderful throughout this entire transition, treating me like her own mother, and often stopping by my apartment with homemade soup or just to chat about her students and their progress. She brings light and laughter into my new life, and their marriage appears to be thriving despite the traumatic beginning to their wedding reception. I actually think what happened that night made our relationship stronger, Sarah confided to me recently. Jake and I learned that we can handle crisis together, that we support each other when things get difficult. We know our marriage is built on honesty because we watched what dishonesty can destroy. I joined a support group for women navigating divorce after long marriages, and we meet every Thursday evening at the community center downtown. The group includes 12 women ranging in age from 48 to 67 each, with her own story of betrayal, disappointment, and eventual recovery. These women have taught me that I am not alone in this experience, that countless women have walked this difficult path and emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentically themselves on the other side. We share practical advice about financial planning, legal issues, and emotional healing, but more importantly, we celebrate each other's victories and growth. Margaret, a 62-year-old retired teacher, whose husband left her for his secretary after 34 years of marriage, has become particularly close to me. The first year is about survival, she told me. The second year is about recovery. But the third year, and beyond that, is about thriving in ways you never imagined possible. Richard has reached out multiple times through text messages and emails, apologizing repeatedly and asking if we can meet to discuss our past and potentially rebuild some kind of relationship. I have chosen not to respond to these communications, not out of cruelty or revenge, but because there is simply nothing left to say between us. Forgiveness, I have learned, does not require reconciliation or continued contact with someone who has caused you harm. I can forgive Richard for the sake of my own peace and emotional health, while still maintaining firm boundaries about what role, if any, he will play in my future. The house Richard and I shared for 20 years sold within 2 weeks of being listed, bought by a young couple expecting their first child. I felt genuine joy knowing that the space where I had raised Jake would again be filled with the laughter and chaos of a growing family, even though it was no longer my family creating those sounds. Using my portion of the sale proceeds, I was able to purchase this perfect apartment in Portland's Pearl District, with its view of the river and easy walking access to museums, restaurants, and cultural events that Richard had never been interested in attending. For the first time in my adult life, I can make social and cultural choices based entirely on my own interests. My small balcony garden now consists of herbs and vegetables growing in carefully tended containers, but I find more satisfaction and joy in these modest plants than I ever did in the elaborate landscaping Richard and I maintained together. These tomatoes, basil plants, and flower boxes are mine alone, chosen by me, cared for by me, thriving under my individual attention and care. The most profound discovery of this new phase of life has been how much I genuinely enjoy my own company and solitude. For 28 years, I defined myself primarily as Richard's wife and Jake's mother, playing supporting roles in other people's stories, rather than writing my own narrative. Now at 54 years old, I am discovering who Mabel really is, when she is not trying to please or accommodate someone else's needs and expectations. I am more interesting, more creative, more adventurous than I realized during all those years of compromise and accommodation. Last month, Jake asked me directly if I was lonely living by myself after so many years of marriage and family life. I thought carefully about his question before answering, wanting to give him an honest response that would help him understand my emotional state. I was far lonelier during the final years of my marriage to your father than I am now living alone, I told him with complete honesty. Loneliness is not about being by yourself, sweetheart. Loneliness is about being with someone who makes you feel invisible, unimportant, taken for granted. The truth is that I wake up every morning feeling excited about the day ahead, curious about what I might discover or create or experience. I make decisions about how to spend my time based on what brings me joy, fulfillment, or growth, rather than what someone else expects or demands from me. I have rediscovered parts of my personality and interests that were buried under years of compromise accommodation and gradual loss of individual identity. The woman I am becoming is more authentic, more confident, more genuinely happy than the woman I was during my marriage to Richard. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you reveals itself to be the best thing that could have happened. Richard's betrayal destroyed the life I thought I wanted and expected, but it gave me the opportunity to create the life I actually needed and deserved. Looking back at that terrible evening at the Riverside Manor, I now realize that Richard unknowingly did me an enormous favor by announcing his intention to end our marriage. He could have continued his affair in secret for years, stealing more money, wasting more of my precious time, keeping me trapped in a relationship that had stopped serving either of us. Instead, his arrogance, poor judgment, and Sandra's manipulation forced the complete truth into the open, where it could be dealt with honestly and finally. The envelope I carried that night represented more than evidence of his betrayal. It represented my refusal to be a victim and my determination to take control of my own narrative. I had spent 3 months preparing for that confrontation, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, making practical plans for my independent future. When the moment finally came, I was ready not just to survive it, but to triumph over it, with dignity and strength I did not know I possessed. 54 years old is not too late to start over completely. In fact, it may be the perfect age to finally begin living authentically, without apology or compromise, or the need to make yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego or insecurity. I have enough healthy, productive years ahead of me to create something beautiful and meaningful with this second chance at life. I intend to make every single one of those years count in ways that honor the strong, intelligent, creative woman I have always been underneath the roles of wife and mother. The story I thought I was living ended that devastating night at Jake's wedding reception. But the story I'm actually meant to live, the story that belongs entirely to me, is just beginning to unfold in ways I never could have imagined possible. The future stretches ahead of me like a blank canvas, waiting for bold, beautiful brushstrokes that will create something entirely new and wonderful. I can hardly wait to see what masterpiece emerges from this unexpected opportunity to start fresh. What would you do if you discovered that everything you believed about your marriage and your future was built on lies and deception? Have you ever had to completely rebuild your life at an age when you thought your path was already determined and unchangeable? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own journey, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding unexpected strength during life's most challenging moments. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we support each other through difficult transitions. Remember that sometimes the ending you fear most turns out to be the beginning you needed all along. Until next time, trust your instincts, believe in your own resilience, and never stop fighting for the life you deserve to live.